Hi, my name is Anya Bundes, and this is my Critical Reflexivity Journal number 1. I want to go ahead and start off by reading a quote from Rodríguez, Amoxtli, the Codex. And in this reading, I'm going to go ahead and read off a section of Rehumanizing Our Esencia. Far removed from la milpa, el maíz transciende barreras erected. Through academic, dehumanizing vernacular, reconnection of our indigeneity. Se ve en the sparks of our grandfathers in the temazcal. Se siente en las vibraciones del rugir del caracol. Tired of holding the sky, she let go, the world spun. In syncopated beats below her feet, on the day she could see, stars tangled in her hair, the lifting consejos de las abuelas embraced her. It all makes sense. Scars remain, resistance of once foreseen disposable populations tucked, folded into another page of historical amnesia. This quote was very significant for me for various reasons that I would like to now break down. The first one is my connection with being una persona de maíz. Rodríguez points out how Chicanes often feel far removed from la milpa. What is la milpa? For me, that means this not only geographical sense like of a cornfield or this visual representation of a cornfield, but more so it is the testimonios, the consejos, la historia, the history of our ancestors, where we come from, the indigenous population and the Mexican mestizo population, mulatto population, everything that is rooted from Mexico, Latino America inclusive too. And it is how la milpa represents this sentiment and this acknowledgement of those people and their history for me. It also represents the values that are attached to this. When I think about being far removed from la milpa, I recognized with this phrase or this concept because for me, as I have slowly come to understand the values of individualism in America, this has been a huge disconnect for me from my roots, my family lineage, and our history. In addition to this, there is a phrase that says historic amnesia from the quote. And to me, historic amnesia also comes from academia and our institutions of schooling in America. This in part is the erasure of indigeneity, of the racial and genocidal violence that was perpetrated by American colonizers onto Mexicanos y la población indígena, the indigenous population of Mexico. And that is also inclusive of what is now America, but used to belong to Mexico. There's also this history of Mexico in relation to the US that has been often removed or has been displaced with other histories that are written by white Anglo men or colonizers in our schooling institutions. All of this, the erasure, this historic amnesia, is something that hugely contributes to being far removed from la milpa for me. In relation to this, there is also Rodríguez in Ixiim, a Maiz-based philosophy, one of the other readings, where he talks about the Arizona ethnic studies ban. He says this banishment was part of an Americanization throwback scheme, an attempt to forcibly separate cultures and impose an American one upon them. I apologize for the sounds. Overall, the two main concepts in these are Americanization scheme and then also the imposure of being American and the American culture. For me, I had several epiphany moments in which I learned about being far removed from la milpa and knowing or recognizing what was lacking. I think oftentimes it is more difficult to identify what we do not have rather than what we do have, because we are often unconsciously missing something and we don't know about it until we learn about it. For me, one part was being in CCS 10A, which is US-Mexico history, and this is the first part of it. And in this class, I had a big realization of knowing that there is a history that has been erased, and that apart from that, we are taught to learn things from the American perspective, and from this perspective of expansion, of ever more expansion and being individual rather than community, which is one of the heart values, I would say, of being part of la milpa. In this, I also came to become a CCS major, and this was a critical moment for me because I was taking a vow to la revolución, and this is a phrase that I take from activist and poet Kim Guerra, who is founder of a movement or a company as well that is called Brown Badass Bonita. And I reference her because she makes this vow to la revolución, which I think resonates with authors like Rodríguez and Professor Pulido later on, which I will talk about. And that there is a vow that Chicanos or Chicanes make in saying to be part of la milpa and to identify as Chicano or Chicana means that I vow to this revolución of acknowledging our ancestry, acknowledging our history, our present, the things that are impacted now by that past, and then also our future and the dreams that we hold for that. In addition to this, a moment that was very foundational for me was having testimonials in my CCS 115 Chicano Chicana Families class. In this class, I had a moment to reflect and in a sense do the work that the Cajita project offers us from Pulido, which he talks about in The Living Color of Students' Lives. In this was part of a project that was yarn paintings, and I want to go ahead and include it in my critical reflexivity journal because it reflects a large part of reconnecting with la milpa, which is the main concept I'm talking about today. And for me, reconnecting with la milpa is hearing the testimonies of my ancestors and those that continue to live today who will form ancestors in the journey, who form part of the ancestors as I will for our future generations. So in this, I wanted to include La Sanación, which is part of healing from everything that Americanization or the erasure, this historic amnesia has done in taking away la milpa. I also want to kind of bring in this metaphor about la milpa in the sense of the actual corn, el maíz. I think that maíz is a really good way to think about things as a metaphor, also because it is a food, and this food represents a history, but it also represents something that nourishes us, and that we consume. And to be removed from the milpa means that you are no longer consuming this. This is no longer nourishing your body. So we don't have that connection. We don't have that freedom to explore our cultural wealth, I would say. And because of this, we lack the nourishment to our bodies and to our souls and to our academic learning as well. That is the connection to our history, our culture, and our people. So in this painting, I wanted to honor the women in my life and kind of represent how they are at the heart of this. But not just the women, but our ancestors in general. And these are plantas que son como hierbas, que son para sanar también. And then I wanted to include Mexico and the United States and that connection and how they are kind of forged and bounded and they merge together as one because we cannot disconnect them both as they have a history that is shared and we can't erase one from the other. Moving on, another part of my critical reflexivity journal is how I reconnected with the milpa, which I started to talk about. Another part is that as I began to uncover new layers of myself, I began to think about how is it that I now connect with this. One part of this is that I was recently in Mexico, and in doing so, I felt like I was stepping out of Americanization or of everything of these American institutions and where we are told to believe or where we're told to replace our history and our culture with. And I also felt that I was stepping into and being reminded that there are more colors, colores, tools, herramientas within us and within me, myself, that make part of the palette that Professor Alberto López Pulido speaks to his students about. He speaks to his students about this in The Living Color of Students, which is another one of the readings. And what he says is that we each have a palette and we have a canvas. One of them is the palette, which is our lived experiences that we have, everything that is within us. And I think part of being far removed from the milpa is not acknowledging that our palette is much wider, more varied, has a lot of colors and textures that we can use. And sometimes we're just left to be limited to a certain palette when in reality there is so much more within us that we have to uncover. with this, I also wanted to bring in something from Profe West, which is this idea of becoming a Chicana or becoming a Chicane. For me, this is something that I have slowly come and I slowly continue to understand and develop. I think when we are removed from such culture, such history, and geographical places as well, or even so when these places that we live in are given another thing and replaced, such as instead of now this being Mexico, it is California, but more so California with an English accent, as it is belonging to America. So with this, what I come to say is that I am slowly learning about my palate as I return to the milpa, as I vow to the revolucion, as I vow to continue to learn and to uncover these new tools, these new colors that will make part of my canvas and what I continue to contribute. This reminds me also of what Pulido calls the ofrenda, and Rodríguez actually makes a reference to an ofrenda in the quote I began with in this critical reflexivity journal of rehumanizing our esencia. This ofrenda is something that Pulido asks his students, what is it that you identify with? Who are you? What do you love? And what is your offering back to the earth? And I think for myself, something that is very well said in Rehumanizing Our Esencia from Rodríguez is the quote, gift givers of life, Ipalnemoani, I apologize for the pronunciation. It is our ofrenda, the love of others, the love of ourselves, the love of humanity, the love of life, the love of the universe. It is our ofrenda. For the next 7 generations, take it in the crevices of your hands, knowing it is necessary for our existence. And I say with emphasis the last one, knowing it is necessary for our existence, especially because once again, this metaphor of la milpa, but also the maiz itself, the corn itself, as something that we consume, something that we take in, something that we must cultivate as our ancestors did. This is something that it is the only crop that was made, that was man-made. And I think that it is our responsibility as Chicanes to cultivate this crop once again, not as a physical corn or maize this time, but as this vow to say, I will continue this history, I will uncover and pass on these testimonios. I will cleanse myself of Americanization, of our colonization of our people, of the historic amnesia of indigeneity, and I will cultivate this maize to grow and to nourish our bodies once again. So with this said, another part is this is an ever more process, and another part is from the living colors of students' lives from Pulido, is when he says, we shall not cease from exploring, and in the end of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. To know the place for the first time, one of the places is La Milpa, but I think more than this, it is knowing ourselves, because La Milpa is within us and it is within our community. And I think we continue this exploration within ourselves because this palette is also within ourselves, as Pulido states. And we need to return to it in order to understand what it is that was erased and is missing. With this said, I think I return once again to this painting, and it is something I will consistently return to because it holds, in essence, la sanación is what it says. It's flipped here or mirrored. But it is what we consume. La milpa still exists in our diet, but more than this, it is something that we must cultivate also in our history, in our comunidad. And we have to learn from our ancestors and the dreamers today who continue to be here, ourselves and our strength, tener cara y corazón, being personas educadas, not just valuing academia and what it teaches us, but challenging it and making presence for ourselves. Overall, I am returning to the milpa, and that has been my overall conclusion from my critical reflexivity journal. Thank you for listening. Bye.